Of the many things that I'm doing, Guardians 3000 I think is the key thing for Marvel, which is having written the 2008 Guardians of the Galaxy comic that the movie was then sort of inspired by. Marvel have invited me back to take on the original 1969 incarnation of the team and write their comic, which is Guardians 3000 because it's set 1,000 years in the future. It's 3000 AD. 3014, and that's great. The first issue's out now, and having an enormous fun with that. My current novel of choice, following from Tomb Raider, is a Mighty Avengers novel that will come out at the same time as Age of Ultron. Yes, must get it right, otherwise Marvel will come around my house and shoot me. Which is an original novel, but will have the sort of the movie characters in it, and that's great fun. When Guardians came out, they asked me to do a Rocket Raccoon and Groot novel. It was the first time Marvel had done an original novel. And that was enormous fun. And they came back to me and said, "Will you do the same thing with the Avengers?" So yes, transferring superheroes into prose form is interesting because obviously you haven't got the wonderful art to support all the things that you would normally do.
What did you think of the film adaptation? And obviously we are getting a Guardian sequel, given the fact it's...
Indeed.
What would you like to see for that? And
obviously I'd like to see more slavish attention to my comic. It was just... When I was writing Guardians back in 2008, first of all, they're not the Guardians of the Galaxy. The Guardians of the Galaxy is a 1969 team of completely different characters. And I've always loved Marvel Cosmic, and so it's characters like Star-Lord and Rocket Raccoon and Groot, and they were just sort of forgotten characters. And Cosmic itself at the time in Marvel was sort of forgotten. It wasn't considered to be a big seller. And it's something I loved. I like superheroes in a science fiction environment. I don't know whether that's a particularly British thing, a sort of legacy of 2000 AD and things like that, but it really suited me. And they let me write Nova, and then there was discussion about doing a team book, and so it really was a matter of cherry picking all these half forgotten characters and putting them into some kind of team, a team of misfits, and then having fun with it. And to me, it was always very character driven because that was what it was about. It was about individual characters rather than about huge space themes so much. And I called them the Guardians of the Galaxy, cheekily nicking the title off the other team that everybody had forgotten about, simply because it was at least a name that was in currency in the Marvel Universe. And Marvel let me do pretty much everything. I was killing people left, right and centre. I was inventing stuff. And that nobody cared because those weren't even important toys that they wanted to be put back in the box. As long as I returned them relatively intact, they didn't really mind as long as I was, telling a good story. So imagine my complete and utter shock when they said, "You know what, it's been optioned and it is likely to be one of the next Marvel movies." And I went, "Wait a minute, hang on, how do you it's not one of the big hitters. People don't know what it is." And I think it showed enormous courage on Marvel's part to think not only will they take essentially D-list characters that are not world famous franchises and make a huge movie out of it, but also to expand the Marvel universe into the cosmic realm, which is obviously one of the things it did in the most spectacular fashion. I thought the movie was marvellous. We went to the European premiere. So we went up the blue carpet, as it turned out. But that was a fantastic thing to see. I'd already had a couple of set visits. James Gunn, the director, had very kindly made it clear that it was, although it wasn't following the storyline, it was inspired by the tone and atmosphere of the comic run, and asked me if I'd like to go to visit Shepperton and see them film it, which I did. So I've been on board the Milano and the Dark Aster, and I met Star-Lord, and I was high-fived by Zoe Saldana. So, that's okay. And he let me read the script, and he talked about it animatedly, and I realised that he also was interested in characters. He was doing amazing stuff. I mean, getting Chris Foster to design the spaceships and wonderful action sequences and all the wonderful things you expect to find in a big blockbuster sort of space opera, but also to have a human heart. So I was extremely impressed, and provided that happens again, I think Guardians 2 will be great. I'm imagining Guardians 2 or something along the lines will show them interfacing with the sort of terrestrial Marvel heroes at some point, as we would all dearly love to see. So yeah, no, I was extremely impressed by it. And also extremely impressed by my screen credit. Unnecessarily impressed by my screen credit. Mainly because he hadn't told me he was doing that. I didn't expect mine. So I was sitting there in Leicester Square going, "Wow, that's fantastic." And the credits rolled and went, "That's my name," which came as a bit of a shock. But yeah, great. Really enjoyed it, didn't we?
We did.
Yeah.
We had a great night out.
And I mean, of course, I think fans, like you say, these are forgotten characters that we've fallen in love with again. Can you talk a little bit, particularly about, I guess, Groot and Rocket, because they're completely unique in the Marvel universe and now very much fan favourites?
Yeah, I mean, it really does astonish me that you can very easily go online, for instance, and find, sort of Rocket and Groot lunch pails and rucksacks and stuff like that. And the idea that, even I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, if you'd walked in the
There
street
were
and
jokes
said,
in the comic industry.
jokes if you knew them in the industry. If you, other than that, they weren't recognised merchandising in any way. The idea of merchandising would have been ridiculous. Groot, what is that? They were both. I mean, and they also came from such very different places. So the sort of Rocket was a sort of comedy space opera character. I think originally drawn by Mike Mignola, and sort of that legacy. And Groot, on the other hand, was a monster from. Somebody will correct me. Tales of Suspense, something like that, or Where Monsters. I don't know. Stanley and Jack Kirby, and it was just a sort of one and done monster that was there for the story purposes. I'm going to drink something because that would help. Sorry about that. And I think they were both very interesting characters. Making Groot a sort of heroic character, I think, was one step, and also putting them together as a double act was the other one that I think was important, because it allowed them to resonate off each other and not just be interesting in their own rights, but suddenly have that sort of, I don't know, Han and Chewie relationship that made each one more interesting because they could be contrasted with the other. And the fact that Groot only says, "I am Groot."
But I also think they're kind of quintessentially English. I don't know why I feel that way about them, but maybe it's because you wrote them.
I don't know. The weird thing about Rocket Raccoon, of course, is for years everybody reckoned that he would have an English accent because Rocket Raccoon was supposed to be a reference to the Beatles' Rocket Raccoon. So they thought that not only would it be a British accent, it would be a Liverpudlian accent.
Yeah, he got a very Bronx accent at the end of the day.
Yeah. So I don't think that worked perfectly well, but yes, there was something iconoclastic and slightly weird and slightly SF strange about both of those, and I think maybe that's one of the things that Guardians has got going for it. It's got that, and I hate to call it a British SF sensibility, but certainly that blending of sort of mainstream superheroes in bright coloured costumes, but actually in a SF context, they are uniforms and survival suits and things like that. They make more sense when you put them into SF than they do if you put them into the middle of Manhattan, and I think that's why I loved Cosmic, because it sort of made sense of the superheroes more. And you can have a walking tree and a talking raccoon. What's not to love? I mean,
I'd like to know. I mean, these two characters are very obscure Marvel characters. Where did you first come across them? At what age and where?
My love of Marvel Cosmic came about probably in the early 70s when I was reading my only access to Marvel comics. In fact, comics full stop. I couldn't get hold of any DC stuff at all. Marvel was. I'm a huge fan of Marvel because Marvel was what I could get hold of in British black and white reprints, the sort of weekly reprints, the Mighty World of Marvel and things like that. In which they published them in black and white in large format, cut up into little instalments, so you get 3 or 4 pages of a monthly comic each week, building this stuff up. And I think I read it was something like Star Wars Weekly, because I of course wanted to know everything I could possibly know about Star Wars at the time, because I was right there at ground zero when it happened. And the backups included things like the original John Byrne, Chris Claremont Star-Lord story, which I absolutely adored, and in fact have now referenced in Guardians 3000 because I think it's just a fantastic thing. And the Sword and the Star, which is the first appearance of Rocket, then drawn by Keith Giffen and written by Bill Mantlo, and remembered, and all the other characters that sort of I think they ran the Micronauts, so Bug, who turned up in Guardians. They were all there. They were all, and these were characters. And quite often I wouldn't have a complete run of those comics either. I'd get it for 2 or 3 weeks and then I'd miss an issue. And I think this is going to sound really strange, but I think that may be where part of the writing thing came from, because I think I filled in the gaps a lot. I'd have the beginning of a story, the end of a story, and I'd go, great, I wonder what happened. And then in my imagination, I'd work out what happened. And so years later, to actually not only say you can write those characters, but actually you can cherry pick them and put them all in the same story, was an enormous delight, and one that I sort of it can be hard work writing, but I keep remembering that I'm doing a job that I'm very lucky to do, and that therefore it sort of makes it easier.
I think just on the subject of Star-Lord, obviously one of the big kind of MacGuffins in the Guardians film was who his father is, and I think there's
Darth Vader.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I mean, I'm curious if you had conversations with James, because I think it's been generally kind of put out there that that aspect of the ongoing film franchise might diverge slightly from what we've seen in the comics.
I get that impression. I haven't had a conversation with James about that, and I don't know whether at what level that decision is going to be taken. I would imagine that given that the connective tissue between the movies is inevitably tighter and more direct to make them work as a movie sequence than it is in the comics. The continuity is likely to be simplified, and therefore I'm guessing that the revelation of his father is going to be a big plot point rather than just one of the the interesting textural, cultural thing that it is in the comics. So I think it's less likely to be, was it Jason of Spartoy that is his dad? But who knows? That might be an important part of what they're doing.
Who would you like to see it be?
I think it should be Rocket. I just think, the plot line there would be so complicated and the questions so embarrassing that you could get 3 or 4 movies out of it. I think that'd be...